Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and we will discuss on intelligent electrifications. We have our world famous speaker, Professor David Smith, Professor Rob, and Mr. Marshall. First, I would like to give chance to Professor David Smith to define today's sessions and explain about this topic. Yes.
This is a very important time, particularly as we're moving forward with this topic, is that uh, the design of our electrical grid hasn't changed a whole lot in decades and decades. We are primarily using an interconnected grid, taking energy from locations and transmitting it at distance with really pretty big inefficiencies in our grid situation today. The ability to maintain the frequency of the electrical currents and just the power that is lost over it in the transmission process is tremendous. So, one of the definitions of an intelligent electrification is to look at ways to generate the power in different ways, to distribute in different ways, to use sensors and other feedback mechanisms, particularly built around using artificial intelligence to help manage and optimize the network. Some of the trends that we see happening in this area is, for example, there's a growing trend towards point of use power generation. And what point of use power generation is particularly looking in areas where you have microgrids established or where you have activities that require large output of power to begin to generate that power locally. And it could be using all different types of things, from using green energy sources like wind power, solar power, uh, geothermal, all the way to using small, particularly depleted uranium as a power source to generate that power locally. Uh, some of the advantages of that is some of the manufacturing operations, particularly in things like semiconductor fabs, other electronic facilities, require power in a pretty tight distribution. The normal power grid uh, will typically cycle anywhere, at least in the United States, from about 105, 110 volts all the way up to about 135 volts. Part of the intelligent electrification is to reduce those tolerances down so that they're in a more controlled environment that can be used. Uh, I was fortunate to be involved with EPRI, Electric Power Research Institute, and NREL, the National Energy Research Center, in producing some of the first roadmaps in this area. And the roadmaps in this type of intelligent electrification really are the things that are going to help us compete better in the world. And this is something that can be applicable both in developed and developing nations, is to look at ways to improve this intelligent electrification system. Like I said, our grid is really very inefficient. We begin to see some of the connected grids, but we're seeing challenges all the way around. You look at things, for example, in the summer in the northern part of the United States, and we see places where intelligent electrification could really help as they struggle to deal with the heat. You see the same thing in the southern part of the United States when we struggle to deal with the winter elements here. But this is one that can be affected both by governments, by companies, and by others really trying to say what's next. And I believe the growth of microgrids will be helpful. We're seeing some microgrids put together in cities like New York and others, where a microgrid might be one large building or a collection of a few buildings, where even tenants have come together to be able to take some of their own electrification needs into their own hands and manage it more efficiently with higher quality than they can get some of the commercial power sources. So, Sharif, I hope this is a good jump off point introduction, but this is one that is a trend that's going to accelerate more into the future.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Professor Rob, what you want to add for today's discussion? If you have definitions and if you can give more examples from industry.
Well, sure. I mean, intelligent electrification really speaks to how you blend a disparate set of electricity sources and network them together using low-cost communications so that you can best manage the grid against the varying loads that occur during the business or weekend day. It requires a much more thorough look at the overall grid elements. As David pointed out, it can include, in fact, the concept was created to help focus on things like climate change and mitigate them. So to best use the resources and to, if wherever possible, favor those resources that are renewable and non-polluting over those that are polluting and use fossil fuels. So the underlying effort certainly would be a lot easier if you started from scratch. In much of the world, we're dealing with environments where the green energy sources and the legacy energy sources aren't really speaking to each other, and being able to manage grid loads has become very difficult. And brownouts, grayouts, and blackouts have become more common as a result. So with intelligent electrification, you focus on making sure that everything is optimized and nothing is overproducing or underproducing. You provide power where it's needed, when it's needed, and not any other time. And the grid is increasingly intelligent and able to recover from point problems and disasters much more quickly and in an automated fashion, so you get a much more reliable grid in theory. You do have to focus on certain things much greater, though. The grid could be more vulnerable to cyber attack and hacking because it is now a fully networked grid. A lot of the protection for the grid as it exists today is many of the grid elements are effectively air-gapped. They're not connected or well connected to the network, and thus can't be hacked except if somebody comes in and does it on site. So as you connect these elements that haven't been connected before, you do have to make sure that you're assuring the security of those elements, because one element compromised, because it can talk to all the other elements, could contaminate the grid, and you could have an even bigger problem than you started out with if you don't think through the security aspects and make sure that you've secured these interconnected elements. But in the end, approaching this problem intelligently should result in power savings, higher reliability, and lower cost for the overall grid, and a much higher use of green energy sources than otherwise would be the case. It just has to be done safely and effectively, as I mentioned, and major focus needs to be on protecting against cyber attack and securing this new interconnected grid.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Ching, what you want to add for today's discussion?
Well, thinking back, I had some experience in this. You see, people send me my friend, Bob S. Block, sent me something to the effect that, this current, it's quite new. It's not an old thing, you see. But something really old is Tesla invented AC. You see, you talk about Tesla quite a lot, and this AC current is not a true AC current. It needs to be formatted to a true AC current in order to be efficient, to reduce losses. So they say that if you can do that, you can increase the efficiency by 20 to 50%. So it's a huge amount. So this leads to this intelligent electrification. Okay, these people who have studied this is the group called the Power and Energy Society in IEEE. Okay, IEEE publication, they are good because they appeal to a large large group. You see, there are a lot of engineers. The bad is their quality is not taught. So if you just pay $500 join a conference, you can publish a paper. So, but this power energy society could be the most reliable source to get all this. And basically, from an overall point of view, you see, long time ago they talk about they start to talk about designing of cities, which eventually lead to this intelligent electrification. That is knowledge city and the college town. This was really carry on with billions of dollars of city planning money in Australia, and now probably also some in New Zealand. And this developed into the current talk of smart city. And even in economic and politics, they talk about charter city. Then finally, recently, just a few years, because this COVID-19, they talk about happy city. So they try to compare which city are the happiest. Fremont, California, is the happy city in California. So that's where they're. Okay, and so basically, what intelligent electrification try to do something like decarbonization. Okay, they want to integration of electric power systems. Basically, that's what they want to do. But there's many items to be considered. The cost of electrification should be compared to the cost of say gas. Okay, I would roughly guess that gas is much cheaper than electricity, especially for heating. Okay, but the electricity is much more efficient for transmission. So this is the main thing is there should be valuation of all the alternatives. Okay, and understanding how to evaluate, one need to look into engineers who provide the data, the actual data on how all these systems are composed and constructed, and the eventual problem. Electric system, for example, will have a problem when there's a solar flare. Gas and other things will not have, for us, a mechanical system. But on the other hand, electricity is much more comfortable and convenient. And the energy efficiency of electricity is definitely much less, up to 50% less efficient. So, that's the starting point, probably for this understanding of intelligence electrification.
Thank you. Mr. Marshall.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think that today's topic is very interesting. It's obviously designed, intelligent electrification is designed to combat climate change and achieve decarbonization goals that are globally being put forth today around the world. And electric power systems need to integrate terawatts of variable renewable generation. That's what this is really about. That's where we're headed. Right now, the current grids around the world are based upon the infrastructures that we have existing right now. And as Hugh pointed out, the IEEE is the right organization to look at. In fact, there seems to be, and David and I think we had a conversation with you before we got on here, that there are actually two definitions of this intelligent electrification, one for vehicles and one for the infrastructure. The IEE publishes documents on both. So you can find a document on the role of intelligent power management strategies for electrified vehicles. That's one. if you want to go down that path. But in today's topic, we're talking about distributed control of changing systems for the grid. So grid-aware aggregation and real-time disaggregation of distributed energy resources in radial networks is another topic the IEE publishes on. So there's a lot of topics out there. So I think if you go to the IEE website and you go to their Explore papers, that's an XPLORE papers subject. I don't have the URL in front of me, but you could find a lot of information on that, on this topic. Basically, to start out, we need to reliably integrate clean energy resources that will require vast electrification and efficiency efforts to redirect energy consumption, not just in transportation, but in heating and cooling towards clean, efficient, and electric demand. That's growing, by the way, not diminishing. And setting aside what's going on with the fossil fuels now, that there's a resurgence in it because of the Ukraine war. Once we get beyond that, it's obviously we're going to be moving more towards a circular economy, and we need to get clean energy out there. To do that, obviously, the most common forms of clean energy are solar energy, wind, and now we're starting to see a resurgence of what we call waste energy. In other words, you take organic and inorganic waste and you convert it into either pyrogas or syngas. Pyrogas is what they term it in Europe. Syngas in the rest of the world. Basically, that's what you do. You have that gas, and then if you can convert it into energy, you've got clean energy. The problem right now is that syngas and pyrogas typically have two types of greenhouse gas emissions in it: volatile organic compounds, which can be composed different constituents depending on what the waste is. So if you're talking about rice hulls or rice husks in India, that's one kind of syngas. If you're talking about MSW, municipal solid waste, it's a combination of organic and inorganic waste from people's living spaces or industrial spaces. That's a different type of syngas. And so what happens is, the problem is the syngas creates these volatile organic compounds, and even when you run them through engines, most engines, you're still getting pollution coming out the back end. However, the good news is that also, by the way, besides that, it also creates PAH, that's polyaromatic hydrocarbons, which are also toxic. But the good news is that there is a technology that we're bringing to the market right now known as the Zajac engine, which is the only constant torque, constant temperature, constant compression engine in the world, which means it runs at 1495 C. I'll say that again, 1,495 C. That's very hot, folks. You don't want to touch it unless it's protected, the engine. So we have that capability. We're using NASA type technology so that people could actually put their hands on the engine and not be burned by it. And it consumes like a sun. So if you look in a piston, most internal combustion engines run with like a sun in the middle and a cold wall around it. This has a hot wall all the way around, so therefore it totally consumes all the gases that come through it. When you do that, you're essentially creating electricity that can be powered through the system and go to the grid. The issue here is, how do you intelligently deploy that power to the grid where it's needed most? And that's where intelligent electrification is coming into play today. And we're going to see more of that. And as Hugh, Rob, and David brought out, this is all, we're on the cutting edge here of this topic, Sharif. So you've brought to the topic a cutting edge topic that is just getting out there, and we're going to see more of this. So I'll leave it at that for this moment, and then I'll give my remarks later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Professor David Smith, very interesting discussion. What new you want to add, especially industrial application, both in like construction and electric car?
Well, it's very applicable in construction going forward as well too. As you begin to see, particularly where you see trends in enhancing manufacturing capabilities, where you see trends in housing movements and things, the concept of intelligent electrification is ones that are now being involved in the planning process as opposed to an afterthought of how do I just plug into the grid. Where Marshall lives, there's dozens and dozens of communities and buildings and complexes, including large hospital complexes and school complexes, that are taking the idea of intelligent electrification and moving it to the next level, where they are producing their own microgrids for intelligent electrification. A microgrid has three real interesting characteristics. It's local. A microgrid is independent, but it is connected back to the grid in most instances. And a microgrid is intelligent. And the intelligence is really what has made microgrids, for example, possible. You also begin to go to the other extreme, and you begin to look at where you're seeing intelligent power distribution being put into the system. In the United States, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission released this year an order number 2222, love the number. But what it is it's setting up the marketplaces and the requirements for a distributed energy resource markets in the United States. And it is designed to implement under a federal regulatory environment intelligent electrification. It sets up the ways to have distributed energy generation done, to have point of use energy generation. It sets up how to put the intelligence that Rob did a great job of beginning to put the nuances into place around the intelligence of the future grid in place. And so as opposed to being in the experimental phase, which intelligent electrification has been for a number of years, it is actually now being quantified into the federal regulations, at least in the United States, as an indicator of where this technology is going in the future. And there actually is a very interesting conference coming up June 28th to June 30th, and it's an international conference and exposition put on by the Electric Power Research Institute. That series, the topic you chosen for today, is the major topic for that conference, and it's pulling together the regulatory people as well as the commercial environments from a very broad international arena in trying to set emerging standards in intelligence electrification. And as Hugh and Marshall have talked about, groups like the IEEE, groups like some of the standards bodies, you're seeing departments of energies from various nations coming together on that. And here in the United States, NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, which is part of the Department of Energy, is trying to take a lead in setting up intelligent electrification that not only includes the traditional sources, but all of the emerging green energy sources and others. And it's looking also at innovative ways to increase the efficiency of the networks. You know, some of the things they're saying, should we distribute electricity over big bundles of wire that innately cause loss of a lot of power? Should we look at ways to transmit high levels of power wirelessly? You know, can we use microwaves, for example, not as a communication source, but as a source to transmit energy at a distance? Can we use some of the Tesla type of approaches? There's a company here in Texas who has successfully used a combination of Tesla towers to transmit large volumes of electricity between the United States and Puerto Rico and Costa Rica to demonstrate that you can bounce power transmission off the atmosphere into other places. So again, the topic of intelligent electrification is a great concept, but is broken into 20, 30 buckets underneath it that all have to come together to work cohesively to achieve the long-term objectives. And as such, it is still one where there's a lot of research being taken, and the research can be taken in developing nations, put in place for their local needs. There are still entrepreneurship activities here, and particularly as you begin to look at the significance of point-of-use power generation and microgrids, particularly in developing nations where the grid structure might not be all that dependable, where because of the infrastructure, the frequency ranges of the power might be unstable a lot of the time, where power is not dependably owned often. There's countries where I've traveled where you can plan on 2 hours, 3 hours a day of electricity being out just because of the stability of a non-intelligent system. And so that's where this is heads for. There's a lot of opportunities, though, for future research, for entrepreneurship activities, and for even citizens forming groups to address now their own power needs in their local communities with the advent of now the smart microgrids. So a lot of opportunities.
ETTT meeting. Use passcode to enter Zoom room. Starts in 5 minutes.
So that's kind of where I think my part is.
ETTT meeting.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Professor David Smith. Professor Rob.
Well, we've got a serious problem right now, exacerbated by the war in Ukraine. We don't have enough of the energy that Europe in particular was using coming out of Russia, and the end result is it's creating a problem that is global in proportions, because the U.S. is now shipping a lot of its oil to Europe. They're paying more for it, so there's the reason. But now it's causing shortages here in the U.S. and both political and operational problems. And we're in the process of converting over to electric vehicles, which will cut up petrochemical use, oil use. But the grids have not been increased in capacity to handle those loads, particularly the peak loads that are going to occur when people come home from work and plug in all at the same time. And to address those needs, we're going to need to make some significant changes and upgrades to the energy grid. If we don't do it intelligently, then we're going to have excessive waste, and we will have increasing brown and blackouts. With intelligent electrification, the hope is if you can connect all the separate elements together more effectively, more efficiently, you can do more with the energy that you have, and you may be able to mitigate some of these effects. But some of the effects are the fact that a lot of the peak generating power around the world is still done with coal-fired and oil-fired and natural gas-fired plants, which means that as we move to electric vehicles without increasing the capacity for green fuel, nuclear, wind, solar, and geothermal, we won't be having as big an impact on the environment as we otherwise would, because we'll be offsetting the savings from the automobiles by the increased production of contaminants and climate change elements by these peak factories, generating plants. So the belief is, once again, if as we grow the grids and make them more resilient, and also make them more intelligent, and gradually make them ever greener, and that we can get to a point where we can mitigate these exposures, and we can get the full benefits of electrification of transportation without the downside of upping our consumption of oil, natural gas, and oil-fired electrical plants. So the goal is as we move against climate change, is not to rob Peter to pay Paul, but to make positive change as rapidly as possible and as effectively as possible. Some of the bigger efforts with regarding this are, of course, the Earth 2 effort which is focused directly on climate change and talking about how you might mitigate problems and model problem mitigation on a global scale. And from that, we should be able to better map the impact of these for lack of a better term, non-green power production generating plants, and focus efforts on correcting that part of the problem as we bring out the green vehicles. But this is all predicated on governments fundamentally realizing that what we've got today is broken, and it needs to be fixed definitively, or as we go into the 2030s, when we'll see huge spikes in electrical consumption, we're going to have huge problems with electrical delivery and reliability as a result. And so getting over that is going to require some very effective and very holistic approaches to the market, looking at things like microgrids, looking at things like localized green generation, and perhaps re-looking at things like nuclear power and better geothermal energy generation, both of which are far greener than many of the alternatives. So it is that approach, that a holistic approach, that look at the problem from a simulation standpoint, from an efficiency standpoint, and coming up with a way to mitigate this coming catastrophe before it becomes a catastrophe, and allow us to continue on with the resources that we have without taking out various grids as they become overloaded and fail. The overloading of grids has been highlighted from everybody from Elon Musk on down as a concern. Most recently, the company that owns Chrysler, Dodge Chrysler, their CEO popped up and said this is going to be a serious problem as they electrify their various car companies, because they recognize that the grids, as we now have them, are not capable of handling the load. And so making this a priority, an equal priority to the electrification of vehicles, is critical to assuring the outcome that electrification anticipates. If it's not done, we're going to have a second set of problems that will emerge in the 2030s that could make this set of problems we're experiencing today look pretty trivial by comparison. So intelligent electrification is one of the ways we approach this problem. A much larger focus on green energy and particularly on energy storage becomes critical, because many of the green energy elements, solar and wind in particular, do not generate 24/7, and so they have to be implemented with a storage technology that allows the system to deliver energy in the hours in which the green energy plants can't produce, and that's all a part of intelligent electrification. And sadly, it's not necessarily all part of the solutions that are being considered. And until that loop is closed, we're going to have a significant growing problem as we move more and more vehicles to electrical power. And that's, by the way, that's on top of the spot shortages we're already experiencing with regard to raw materials, particularly for batteries and electronics, which we're experiencing today. So we've got a number of, we'll call them logistics problems. Energy is only one of them, but it's on the critical path to our goal to reach a green energy standard that right now, unless we do something, will be unachievable. So intelligent electrification is on the critical path to get us where we're going, and we're not putting enough focus on it.
Thank you, Professor Ching.
Yeah. In addition to the technical discussion we just had, this is it's a new field. It should have a new start, and we should start to consider everything. Just like Rob and David and Marshall, they tend to move into this. They're saying that we can not really control everything. So we just start this thing from a new perspective. First, the word intelligent is probably from artificial intelligence. This is a part of this is renewing the infrastructure with intelligence. Okay, infrastructure used to be the least high-tech area in electrical engineering. Okay, now it jumped into the most advanced area in engineering. Okay, so what really amounts to now is this old system, device supplier and the consumer in all areas, in automobile, in house heating, into two areas. But now it start to get into consumer also start to become the suppliers. Okay, everything start to mix into one system. And here, this new intelligence, the word intelligence comes in. It will involve big data for AI. Okay, then plus electrification, which is really old subject. So the word intelligence is what really make this thing completely new. Okay, so what, for example, this wireless transmission, David mentioned, and my case that we need to synchronize the AC signals so it will suffer less loss. Coming to just this one topic, it's 25% of the interest, you see, the cost. So there is this this new start for infrastructure, not just for this electrification, but also for road, bridges, also other stuff which involve AI. And what I'm suggesting as a conclusion is that we should not just be dealing with IEEE. Basically, we should not be dealing with the organization. If the people want to look into it, is the Power and Energy Society, which is the main IEEE society which are dealing with this. But I'm actually not for the engineers. I'm saying that we need to move beyond engineering to science, to mathematics, to logic and philosophy. And we need people who think more fundamentally to look into this. My personal priority in knowledge are, fuzzy logic, complete automation, valuation, robotics. So this intelligent electrification should start with valuation. It should take all the alternatives and calculate to see how much they really cost. And with regard to all the supply and demand of alternatives, my guess, just as a rough guess, is again the nuclear power will be the big development. Okay, we're doing all this thing about intelligence. Why not just try to make the nuclear power plant more intelligent? Okay, and we need to look at very long term, not just today's few examples. We're today the technical discussion is just about a few examples, but this field of make infrastructure more intelligent is really jump to the forefront of knowledge, and it will start. All the old societies start with infrastructure. Okay, then it becomes the low tech technology. So when I was in school, I was discouraged to look into low tech. Nobody go into power systems, things like that. But today it start to again, and Sheriff raised many questions in this regard. It looks like we need new thinking. We need the very you know, deep thinkers. We need deep thinkers. I would wish every field like earthquake, weather, they would just, you know, pick out some deep thinker, just one or two, you know, to make the field more intelligent. You know, I really, one thing I used to criticize the weather prediction. If we dump one or two real deep thinkers into weather prediction, we probably will get some solution from it. See, instead of people who are not really the recognized deep thinker to look into this type of things. So same thing for this current situation of intelligent infrastructure. You see, each field we need to have some real good thinker to look into it. I think people here, we are, you know, at least we were aware that this is a big problem. It's not as trivial as just a few technical examples we see today. Yeah, that's my conclusion. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall.
Yeah, Sharif, a really great topic. Again, I think some of the issues that both Rob, Hugh, and David have brought up need to be addressed, and I think they will be addressed. And I believe there are deep thinkers out there, as Hugh says, that are going to address this, if not already addressing it in different ways. One of the issues that was brought up is that, and I think Rob brought this up, is that if you're going to create batteries that are going to be able to store energy and then be used on a distributed basis, the question is, what are the batteries made out of? And you're usually mining what we call rare earth metals to do that. And so that in itself causes pollution. So how does one combat the climate issues with mining heavy metals and those rare earth metals? Well, the good news is again, I'm coming from the practical sphere where implementation is key. And so we have just formed a joint venture with a gold and silver mine in Nevada. And we formed that joint venture to take the tailings and the water that have both silver and gold. When you use silver and gold, you're using different types of chemicals and caustic materials to extract those precious metals. The same thing with other metals like boron and other metals that are used in producing a material for batteries and things like that. So we have discovered in our own realm that yes, there are other technologies out there that are creating green electricity, as they call it. But how green is it? If you use the overall calculation, I think Hugh brought this up. If you use an overall calculation of all the carbon that is being sequestered or all the carbon that is being emitted into the atmosphere, you are not ahead of the game. And in order to do this, you need a capability, technology capability that does exist today, by the way, as I mentioned before, using a combination of pyrolytic carbon capture and storage technology, our Zajac engine technology, and at scale. If you can process 120 metric tons a day of waste and convert that into syngas, thermal energy, and elemental char, you have a means for creating an economic value. At the same time, you have a means of reducing the carbon footprint of these things. And the materials that you're using from the char can be used to clean up the mines that are actually creating the ability to make the batteries that we're talking about, as well as other mines such as coal, gold, and silver. And we're demonstrating that already. And I think that's a reality that's here to stay. It's brand new. The adoption of it is going to be difficult for governments to adopt because they're usually 10 years behind the curve. The problem is governments don't have 10 years to wait. There's a climate clock in New York City, as I've iterated before. It gives us less than 10 years, less than 7 years, less than probably 5 years at this point. So if Modi's government in India is saying 2070, we're going to be net zero, they're going to be too little too late. And all those rice hulls that they're burning are just going to kill more people, create more pollution, and cause more harm. But there's a way to solve that and create a profit center out of it for all these people and also contributing back to the grid through an intelligent grid capability. So one of the things what are the constraints of intelligent grid? The constraint of intelligent grid is basically devices' ability to flex for the demand. That's what is generally considered intelligent, that you can flex for the demand, and you have these cyber algorithms and cyber physical architectures to secure the information management and deploy it properly. That's what we mean by intelligent. Obviously, the grid is the grid, and it can be handled through green renewable energy or traditional fossil fuel energy. Both are out there, and both are being used. The question is, can we increase the capability to flex the ability in such a way that it meets demand on, kind of like what Hugh was talking about, the weather forecaster. Weather forecasters are not known for forecasting weather very well. But with new intelligent technology and artificial intelligence and other topics that we've talked about, I think that we are in a position we're on the cusp of being able to answer this question. There are three basic fundamental barriers to entry to adopt this. One is the technology on intelligent technology is it out there? Is it being, does the technology actually exist? It does exist. The question is, how do you integrate it? And then the second thing is, who will finance it? So the good news is there is a financeable option to do this. It exists. And it can exist for countries in the developing world. And this is the approach that we're taking with the World Talent Economy Forum, to bring a climate bond, an EU climate bond, and let the investors in the climate bond pay for all these costs. The good news is the costs are one thing, but can one make money out of it? Well, the good news is there's two types of fundamental economic values. If anybody that's studied Economics 101 should know that there is economy of scale, meaning that the more you manufacture, the lower the price point for that unit of whatever you're producing, whether it's electricity or widgets. But on the other hand, there's also known as economy of scope, and that's where the integration of different technologies create economy of scope. And economy of scope allows our joint venture partners to make money and be profitable while addressing the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the UN simultaneously. And those goals are critical to meeting the requirements of implementing intelligent design and intelligent electrification. Without the SDGs, you're out there kind of like in the Wild West, and you're just shooting all over the place. Here we have a framework in which to apply this framework, that's the third element, the SDGs, together with financing through climate bonds and deploying it through the technologies under stringent waste management taxonomies, so that we're not polluting and we're not taking coal-fired power plants to fund electric cars, which is ridiculous. You're not getting a net zero, you're getting a positive carbon deployment. So I think that there's a lot to talk about. It's a big topic, Sharif. And thank you for bringing this topic to the table. I'm sure there'll be more topics like this in the future. And I think everybody here is on not necessarily on the same page, but certainly on the same topic and has a lot to contribute. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor David Smith, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
Sharif, I agree with Marshall and everything else that's been said. This is a very important, timely topic today. If you think about it, electrification is the key to most digital technologies today. It's the key to our manufacturing process. It's actually the key for us creating our sustainable quality of life. And so it's one that it continues to need to be advanced. Many parts of the electrical transmission chain have not been modernized in years. Some of the new threats we're seeing today, particularly based around electromagnetic pulses and other threats like that, can take out parts of the grid. We're entering a time of enhanced solar flares, which also can affect our electrification process. So there's a lot of movements towards what can we do to improve this. I think applying the advances in sensors with the Internet of Things, the ability to apply advances in artificial intelligence, new ways to rationalize green energy into the grid, all are drivers for intelligent electrifications, are ones that we need to, as a world, take advantage of. So, Sharif, thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Rob, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
We have a significant energy problem globally. The Ukraine war has exacerbated that. We undoubtedly need to approach the energy problem holistically and globally. Intelligent electrification is part of that solution, but only part. We do need the capability of being able to more easily move energy from state to state, and from areas where it can be produced to areas where it's needed much more efficiently. The elements of development are looking at other high performance forms of green energy and beginning to model them being introduced into the grid to supplement the power needs of the electric cars and trucks and planes that are coming to market. Until this is done, we have an exposure that's going to be appearing in about the 2030 timeframe, where we're going to have a serious lack of electrical energy, and particularly a serious lack of storage facilities for that energy as we continue our conversion. Fixing that problem should be a far higher priority than it is, and until we raise the priority level of this effort, we are exposed to another fairly significant economic impact as we approach the end of the decade. So it's important, and should be more important in the list of things that governments are looking at and funding at the moment.
Thank you. Professor Ching, what's your concluding remarks for today?
You see, I would like to make some concluding remark regarding education for this world that's coming. And I talked this a few times before, that we need to go from the money-oriented society to a knowledge-oriented society. So it's a part of the education aspect in this knowledge-oriented society is what I like to sort of describe slightly here. And also that this this knowledge-oriented society will answer the question that David, Rob, and Marshall raised. They said we have this problem with the government, with the leaders. Okay, they're not leading us with knowledge. Okay, they got this election system, democracy, which tend to produce centralist leaders with centralist ideas. They don't want to change ideas. Okay, while we need some guidance from knowledge, so we need knowledge leader. In science, there's already knowledge leader. The scientific leaders, everyone need to get a PhD in science. They're not going to lead unless they have sufficient knowledge. Okay, so there is some indication that society going in this direction, but particularly in education, you see. I got my degrees, all the degrees from MIT. Okay, MIT taught us just theories. They don't want to teach us practical things. Because once we learn the theories, we can handle all the practical problems. That is the basic idea. But after I received all my degree from MIT, I have very little association with MIT. Completely going into a new area, which is very related to this intelligent, infrastructure, particularly the electrification. You see, I would suggest students, even in engineering, they should have sufficient knowledge in science, mathematics, and logic. Science will help them make more new discoveries in science. And mathematical logic will teach them to be critical thinkers. So they don't need to accept anything science delivered to them. You see, to my mathematics professor, Harold Grad, science is a religion because science is based on laws of nature, which has no reason. Okay, it depends on the law of uniformity, which says what happened in the past will happen in the future. Okay, this kind of thinking makes science is not really the foundation of knowledge. But today's society dominated by science, so science is, the theory of everything of what? It's just totally, I wouldn't call it nonsense, but I think this is just everything for science. Okay, it's not outside of science. So that's what I hope the student
Thank you.
will get the idea. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. Mr. Marshall, what's your final comments for today's session?
Yes, Sharif. So my point is from the implementation point of view, and it's only one small aspect of all this, and that's taking waste and converting it into multiple outputs that allow us to create an economy of scope approach financially to create profits and jobs and reduce poverty under the Sustainability Development Goals of the UN and address the other goals. So one of the constraints that we're seeing now in intelligent electrification is that the device's ability for flexible demand. I said that in my last round, but this is both in the terms of duration, which is megawatt hours that one can run, and also in magnitude, which is the megawatts that are used, that need to be deferred for the demand. So this is what the battery structures are about, that you have a intelligent electrification that gets you to be able to store the energy that you're creating or deploy it at the point when it's needed. The beauty of taking waste to energy allows you, as opposed to, let's say, solar or wind energy, which are considered green technologies, is that you're actually taking waste, you're converting it into other products besides energy and electricity, but at the same time, you can deploy that electricity into a battery storage system, or you can actually deploy it into the grid immediately. Again, the beauty of the Zajac engine is that it runs, each one unit can be either anywhere from between 240 kilowatt hours, so you can have a small deployment, up to 3 megawatts. And if you needed more than that, and you had enough syngas or pyrogas to run it, you can gang them up. So that's not the issue. The issue is, again, I think 3 points that I want to leave everybody out there with. We need to, and I think both Rob and Hugh and David have all addressed the issues that we've got a lot of constraints. The main constraint is getting people to adopt an innovation from their perspective. Electricity was actually only deployed in the United States in 1909. Before that, you were using syngas, believe it or not, from gasification processes. So electricity is relatively a few hundred years old. Its ability to set those structures have not been upgraded and modified, but now we have an opportunity to hit 3 birds with 1 stone. We can go out, improve the quality of electrification, improve the intelligent distribution of the electricity, and at the same time, take waste and convert it into electricity without having to create more pollution. And in fact, getting net zero or net negative carbon sequestration, which is the goal of intelligent electrification. That is the climate change issue that it is intended to address. Whether it will do it or not, we will see. We believe, because we're in the heart of it, we believe that will happen. So I wish everybody a good day, and that's my concluding remarks, Sharif. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. It's really great discussions, and I believe our audience also enjoyed today's sessions. Tomorrow we have a very special debate. It's a little bit of open-ended. Yes, we have a team from Professor David Smith and from Professor Rob. I also want to invite Professor Ching and Mr. Marshall. Like tomorrow's debate, I believe that it will be very interesting for our audience as well. We will discuss on 21st century innovations. So our format is like our topic is what was the most important invention of 21st century. Uh, uh, speakers actually they can take one of the innovations and they can explain these innovations was more popular and more helpful for the society, and this way what will be the important things for our audience, they can understand the popular innovation of 21st century. So I request our honorable speaker, Professor David Smith, Professor Rob, Professor Ching, Mr. Marshall, to join our very interesting debating sessions. I'm sure through this debate, our audience can learn more interesting things from you. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Bye-bye, Sharif. Bye-bye, everyone. Take care.